Hi everyone, I'm Rita Kakati-Shah, your host for the Uma Show. Welcome to your one-stop journey for feeling empowered. We are a platform for change. We build confidence. We are your voice. We want you all to be bold, be you, be Uma. Today, our theme is role models in technology, and I'm so excited to be joined by a goddess of go-getting, Khadija Mustafa, who is Senior Director, Head of Global Partner Ecosystem, Autonomous Systems, Technology and Research at Microsoft. Welcome, Khadija.
Hello, thank you so much. Such a pleasure and honor to be here.
Oh, it's wonderful to have you. Thank you for coming on. You're the daughter of a diplomat. You spent your younger years between Pakistan and the US. You have lived in 6 countries, 14 cities, and you visited over 75. Wow, that's a lot of traveling. Tell us a bit about your younger years and your upbringing.
Yeah, so it was, I ended up, of course, doing a lot of the traveling later in life as well. And I sort of always had this wanderlust. And I think a lot of that was inculcated in me by my family. Both my parents had traveled, in their own ways, sort of decades ago. I heard all those stories. I ended up doing some of that traveling myself because when we, for example, moved to the US, I remember, we had stopped in Europe and we're like a large family. So my father had gotten everyone together and we visited, I don't know, 5, 6 countries. So there was always the sense of adventure, the sense of exploring and learning. That kind of was woven into my childhood. And then sort of as I got older, it was just something that I made my own. And that, of course, resulted in a lot of the travels and exploration. But I think one other thing is sort of kind of my childhood was formed a lot in terms of, be adventurous, learn, get out there. And I think it always inspired me.
That's actually an amazing journey. And actually, you've been a very independent, strong woman, I think partly because of your upbringing and your childhood as well, and quite a free spirit, actually. You've actually given a TEDx talk, haven't you, on the topic of to define is to confine. What inspired that topic?
It's interesting because there was a couple of different themes that were going through my mind. And then I said to myself, because most people who do TEDx's tend to be experts in that particular subject matter, or they've written a book. And I thought to myself, there's things I can talk about, tech, business world and all. But then I said to myself that, it's an opportunity to sort of be on stage to talk about something that matters. And what is it, where do I want my voice? What do I want to apply it to? And this was a topic, and again, it's sort of probably been there forever from childhood onwards. And I gave that talk, I think it was 6 years ago, maybe. And, we talk about being a global citizen and all those things, and they became fashionable later. But it was always something that I felt very deeply because I think kind of that era of nation states and how we define ourselves in limited dimensions is sort of archaic, and one needs to move on. Basically just went through a whole brainstorm process and brought a lot of elements of my own life and learnings, and definitely the influence I've also had from my own upbringing and my parents into the mix.
Yeah, and I mean, it's a brilliant talk. I've watched it. It's wonderful. And also it's so unique, to define is to confine, and you kind of hear it and think, wow, that is actually just so meaningful. And actually kind of confirms a lot of what we kind of, our daily lives and what we go through every day. So really loved it and enjoyed hearing about that. So you're a techie person. You spent over 22 years in technology, but essentially you got into tech by mistake, didn't you? Talk to us a little bit about your career path.
Yeah, so it's funny because I tend to use that word mistake, and I'm going to slightly edit it. Since I sort of, I fell into it by accident. Wow. And I think career for so many people, and especially kind of the time when I was growing up, was always about be thoughtful and be strategic and, plan your 5-year career. And I used to always remember, like, it used to be a classic interview question. I don't know how much people are still asking it per se. But I used to always sort of say, how do I know what I want to do 5 years from now? Right. So for me, it never really resonated. And because I always sort of, I kind of fell into things. I hadn't been as methodical as probably people have thought. And I'm not saying one shouldn't be, but there's a time and place to be methodical. And I think there's not a time and place, but maybe an opportunity where one should sort of let things evolve because the world is changing so much. So for me, I'm not a techie in terms of the sort of typical STEM background, like kind of a a technical background. And it was a series of events that basically resulted in me finding my way into technology. And of course, more on the business side. But then when you're in business and technology, you learn so much about the tech itself. And it was funny because I was actually living in Hungary at the time. Because this was quite a while ago. And I remember seeing like a news story about how Bill Gates was visiting. And, somebody was sharing the story with me. I think it was either on some plane ride with him or something. And they asked him, what's the secret of your success? And he said, I hire really smart people. And I remember that stuck in my mind. And this is before I ever even wanted or dreamt or even thought of a career in tech. And it's just such an irony where one ends up following, where you end up and how there's different trigger points in your life that may have indirectly sort of, pointed the universe in that direction.
That's amazing. And it's amazing how somebody can say something small, or you watch somebody, or one small sentence resonates, and that shapes your future career path. It's quite amazing, actually, because I've heard stories like that, and you're kind of, I guess, the living example of that. So then, hey, 22 years later, and here you are. So, and then going from that, you actually got involved in artificial intelligence. Tell us a bit about that and how you got involved.
Yeah, so, it's interesting because AI is not new. There have been people who've put their blood, sweat, and tears into decades of, research. It was relegated into the basements. And then all of a sudden over the last, whatever, five years, maybe 5 to 10 years, it's kind of been coming more in vogue. People are seeing the application of it. It's especially through a sort of social path, we're kind of experiencing it a lot more. And I think, so for me, what ended up, again, if you asked me 5 years ago, was I going to end up in AI? And that's what I was sort of planning on? Absolutely not. I'm not sure most of us even thought there would be a career, okay, maybe a little bit more than 5 years ago. And what ended up happening is, as I was thinking about my own journey and thinking about, okay, what would keep me at where I am, sort of within the company I'm at and in tech in general, and what are some exciting things? For me, it's always been about being at the cutting edge and being in something new and something where we haven't figured it out. Right? It isn't about the small incremental improvements. It's about there's this new thing, and how do we sort of take this to market? How do we think about it? What are the implications? So given that, I thought to myself, this is one area I'd love to be in, and if not, then I'm going to change course. So I guess the universe had plans for me to stay where I was working and then end up going into this new field, which has been fantastic and very inspiring.
What has been the most fantastic moment for you in the new field?
Its implications for humans and society. So I think a lot of us have heard about this whole notion of AI for good and, sort of ethics in AI, and the fact that you now have machines and algorithms basically making decisions where at least before you had human intervention of some sort. Yeah. And I think we haven't figured it out. And it's not just about business. It's not about the company who's implementing an AI solution. It actually has implications for us as a society. Right. So I think for me, even though what I'm doing right now is AI in the context of business, but working for a company that thinks about it, engaging with customers in the industry on these issues and sort of learning and growing collectively, and the role that I think we all have to play, because a lot of people are probably sitting at home thinking, well, okay, I'm not in tech. This doesn't concern me. Right. Yes, it does. Or if you're even, let's just say, a mother and not working, yeah, well, I'm not working. So what do I have to think about? What are you going to, how are you going to direct your kids? And the implications are absolutely there, because AI comes into play if you can get a mortgage or not, whether someone gets a job or not, whether someone goes to jail or not. It isn't just about to improve things in the business world. So I think from that perspective, that's the part that I find the most fascinating.
Absolutely. And you hit the nail on the head there, because it is actually something that influences all of our lives and everything we're doing. And to your point, if you aren't currently in the professional workforce, but you're at home or in another setting, you're still using AI. You might be on devices, or for whatever reason, you might be on social media that is based, you have these ads that shoot up, or you just say one word, you're having a conversation with somebody, and miraculously on your phone, that ad just pops up, and you're like, oh, okay, how did that happen? So these are happening every day. So I love the fact that you're in that, and you're kind of in the midst of what's actually going on out there. And you've obviously had a lot of experience in the business world. You are a very senior woman in leadership, and not just that, you're a woman of color in leadership. Tell us a little bit about your road to the top.
That's very kind of you. I think it's always the continuous journey, right? I would say it is interesting. I mean, today there's so much more focus on color, on diversity and inclusion. And honestly, it's really new. I mean, yes, companies have been talking about it. I mean, there's been, for the last few years, there's been some focus on it. This year, we've seen it come into the fore where, people don't even think twice and they're going to, wear it on their sleeve in whichever way. And I think, at least during my time in career, like, I mean, as I was progressing in my career and being younger in it, you didn't talk about it.
Right.
You definitely didn't wear the woman card. You definitely, definitely didn't wear the color card. It was a very different time. And I think especially when you think about, Gen Y and Z, I'm not sure to what degree they realize that, because you never got any brownie points for highlighting that. I mean, if anything, your career would be limited. And let's just be honest, because I mean, even if it didn't happen overtly, it would happen in other ways. So for me, I evolved in a time where politics, religion, and diversity, you don't really talk about it. You keep it to yourself. It wasn't meant to be in the workplace. But it would be very interesting because while I was operating, I mean, I was running some like very large global accounts in the US, and I would have, your classic male, sort of white Anglo-Saxon Protestant, what we refer to as WASP executives, right? Usually a couple of decades older than me, especially when I was earlier in my career. And they would have all these opinions of me. And some of those would come out in personal, when I got to know them well. I would be surprised that they would think like that. But again, we're all humans, right? So I always felt like I was a bit of an oddball, and I had to operate under a certain way to not let that work against me. So it was definitely there at the back of my mind. But then the irony of it is, then I went overseas. Well, I mean, I went overseas many times, but I actually took on an assignment overseas where I was running our health business in Middle East and Africa and living in Dubai. And it was so funny because all of my sort of, Western male colleagues would say, "What is it like being a woman in the Middle East?" And I would say, just like being a woman in the US, managing a Fortune 50 company. The only difference is over here I had WASP men, over here I've got different types. So I said, for me, all the biases are all there. It's really interesting because they were fascinated. They're like, "Oh my God, you go do business in Saudi. How do they treat you?" Yeah, and there's elements, and I've, at some point I'll write stories about it because it has been a very fascinating journey from that perspective. And I think one thing I would say to people is, as much as we do need to take it seriously, you also have to let it roll off your back. Because I see people who I mean, I had all kinds of experiences, and I'm not going to ramble on, but where I was sort of like, "Oh my God, how am I going to handle this one?" Right? In sort of both the Western, Eastern, North, South, however you want to define it, worlds.
Right. No, absolutely. And I completely agree with you. I mean, I came from a finance background, trading floor, same thing. It's almost like, and this is what I do for a living now, diversity and inclusion and training companies. And I think there is a fine line with, acknowledging it that there's an issue and trying to solve it, and giving the perception of playing victim, so you're judged upon by it, if that makes sense.
Yes.
And
no,
I think
it does. Yeah.
So I think part of getting further in your career as well is almost like earning those stripes, showing those resilience, and also gaining your colleagues' trust. And when you get through that, then you get a different level of acceptance, I find, than if somebody's paved the way for you. So there's a very fine line. And the advice we give to companies is that you don't want to bring in programs and to make it look like these people can't do things themselves. Nobody wants to come in to a job or a program feeling that they're only there because of the skin color or their gender. Absolutely, they're there because they deserve to be there. They work as hard, if not harder, than anybody else, and that is what needs to come across. So you have to allow them the time to actually get the benefit of the doubt as well of their colleagues as well. It's a very different force field, I think, right, in the workforce, and I'm guessing that is exactly what you've seen and come through as well in your experience.
Yeah, no, it's actually very well said, because at the end of the day, we are humans, and when you do build those connections, we start overlooking so many things. And I'm just going to give two examples because you touched on financial services, right? So there was a time I explored a career in investment banking and management consulting, and I was specifically told, when you're coming for an interview, make sure you're wearing a skirt and your hair is tied, right? So just to level set with those who are probably earlier in their career, they'll be like, "What?" Because I mean, that was definitely much earlier. I never heard it later, and in tech, that wasn't the case. But I remember thinking, okay, interesting, because otherwise you'll be distracting. Or if you're wearing pantsuit, you look like you're trying to be a guy. All right. So it's a very interesting, I mean, so that was me. That was when I was interviewing in at 21 or something. Right. And then on the flip side, there were scenarios where I said, for example, and I'm going to share this because it is a personal story. When I was, some of my best business meetings were in Saudi. I sometimes don't actually even believe it in many ways, but and I was told, especially because I was dealing with some of the ministers of health at the government level, and I had the local office say to me, Khadija, okay, if you are a so-called, I guess what they were getting at is if you're a Western woman and visibly Western, like maybe lighter hair, whatever, you don't have to cover your hair, but they're like, we are going into a government office. Would you mind just covering your hair, even though you're a foreign woman, you don't have to? And I said, sure, it's not a problem. But they were being very sensitive to, you don't have to, but it would be. My view is I'm here for business meetings. If that's the custom, whether I agree with it or not is besides the point. It's not about my opinion, because you would get a lot of people who would be fighting it. Low. I know I'm not going to do that. And it's like, well, listen, you want a deal, right? You want to close some deals, and you want others to feel it's like you're speaking their language, right? In another country, they appreciate it. I mean, I did that. And there were things like that where I say that you have choices to make and you can choose to make a point. Some people might say, well, why did you do that, right? I mean, if that wasn't for me, maybe that's how I survived in that setup. Otherwise, I would constantly, I mean, that was my biggest market. So I had to decide, how am I going to conduct myself?
No, I 100% agree with that. It's almost like, when you go into somebody's house, you do as they do. You may wear shoes yourself in your own house, but if somebody else has the policy of taking it off, you take them off. It's just what you do, rather than, well, I don't do it in mine, so I'm not going to do it here. It's almost like you're respecting the culture, the house, the environment you're going into. And I think that's exactly what it is. And ultimately, if more of us did that, rather than think, oh, well, because there is, again, a fine line between showing respect to somebody else, or feeling so entitled yourself not to do that. And it can come across, instead of holding your ground, as being arrogant as well. So it's, again, a fine line in how you maintain that. And to your point, you're there to do business. Business is global. It's about respecting the person you're trying to deal with. So I love that analogy. You're a senior woman, and you are a founding member of Chief, which brings together senior women across different industries. Why do you think it's important for women to have that sort of tribe?
Yeah, so I think the Chief leaders have done a great job setting that up. And I was fortunate enough to sort of join, in the New York office when they were sort of setting up their membership. I would say it's so key because, it's sort of like girlfriends, right?
Yeah.
I mean, again, you can have both, all genders. That's not the point, but it's, there's that personal tribe. There's people who are going to be your cheerleaders, who are going to egg you on, who are going to force you to be better than you are. And I think professionally, what Chief has tried to do is to get women together to sort of, help elevate women, because oftentimes we find that they do end up leaving the workforce, or they can't get into board positions, or they don't find other like-minded role models, right? There's so much of that. So I think what their intent is fabulous. It is very important for one, even outside of an organization, to try to build that. Over the years, I would ask myself, I got so busy in work, I didn't think about that. But it is important. It's just like you have your female friends who egg you on. Well, in the professional world, they give you advice because maybe they've been there, right? They can act like mentors. You can act like mentors to others, because that's so important, right? Having mentees and guiding the path for others. Some of them open doors for you. Those personal networks, going back to the point you made earlier, right? Once people get to know you, if you want to reinvent yourself, they'll be willing to give, they'll give you a shot, because they'll be like, yeah, I interacted with you there and I saw that, you have this great fashion sense. So maybe you're in tech, but you want to move into fashion. How is that going to happen just by sending your resume? So I think we all know that. I mean, we live in a social era now, but I think nurturing that, because you can be a member, you can start these things, but nurturing is so important. It's like nurturing a good friendship, nurturing family. Just because you have family, you haven't seen them for like 5 years, it's not the same relationship. So how do you intentionally do that as a part of your, and I don't mean like sending a Facebook message, or I mean like really find part of that nurturing, by the way, to me, at least what it means to me outside of the given, right, is how do you help others meet their goals? So This could be 10 years more senior than you. They could be a CEO. The funny thing I find is everybody needs help. Everyone needs perspective. Everybody wants to talk about themselves. So it doesn't matter where you are in the pecking order and the age or the generation. It's how do you go out and help others fulfill their potential? And when you do that, you build networks and connections that are very meaningful, because people will then want to go out of their way for you as well.
Yeah, no, that's very well said. And I think, it is important to have that group and that tribe there. And I think that's to your point. You're trying to find role models, but you're also finding how you can help others as well. And for folks that prefer to be in a setting where they think, you know what, this is like-minded women or individuals, and I think that really helps nurture them and their careers going forward. So I think, kudos to being part of that as well, and finding their way forward. Now, sort of pivoting a little bit to your personal life, you recently got married. Congratulations. As someone who chose to tie the knot a little bit later on in your career, in your life, how have you found that transition from singleton to being a couple?
Yeah, so it's interesting because oftentimes I think I'm going to generalize a little bit, because I think oftentimes people are either thinking about it, they factor that into their life plans, their goals. For me, it was the reverse. I never planned for it. I don't think I thought much about it. So this goes back to my point about in my life, there have been a series of things that have just happened. And when they happen, you're like, oh, okay, now how am I going to, my life has been so different, and I thought it was going to be a very different life. So
yeah,
it's been, of course, wonderful, which is why I did it. But my point is, it was kind of the opposite, where some people are like, oh, well, that shouldn't be such a big, call it learning curve or ramp or change. For me, it was not so much to say that it's been big, but yes, spending your life being very, very independent,
yeah,
being raised like that. I never really waited for anything. I never sort of said, oh, I'm not going to go to this country because I'm going to wait until I get married, or something, right? And there's nothing, by the way, there's nothing wrong for those who have. I have members of my extended family where they, they've really been specific about, I'm not going to do X, Y, and Z because I want to experience that with my husband. Well, it's wonderful. In my case, it was opposite. I'm like, heck, I'm not going to miss out on that safari. For all I know, my legs might not be working, or something, or God forbid, right? I mean, I've had lots of physical injuries and stuff, like doing adventurous things. So I'm like, I'm not going to miss out on that experience. So I think the important, so I guess the short answer is it's been wonderful. It's not without its challenges, as so many of you know. For me, I have to admit, going through it later in life, maybe some of these things would have been helpful to know, but until you experience it, you don't. And remembering that you've got another life involved, right? So how do you formulate? It's not your dream, it's our dream. And I think the beauty of that is, well, one thing I can say is I have lived, while I've been single, I have lived it to its fullest. So I don't really have any, I think a lot of people oftentimes end up having regrets.
Yeah.
And I'm going to actually wallow on that for a minute. But the important thing is, to live, to do the things that are important to you, so that whenever you segue into a different chapter in your life, whatever that might look like, because, I truly believe each to their own, because I don't think marriage is for everyone.
Absolutely.
I think there's some, everything, right? Motherhood, marriage, which is, I know people have a lot of opinions on it. I'm just sharing mine. So the point is, you have to know what you're willing to do. For me, what's been wonderful is that I've lived so much of my life doing so much of the stuff that I have, that for me, the coupledom part is wonderful, because it's a new chapter of other things, right? So I think I embrace it, and that's an important thing.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I love that, and very well said as well. So it seems to be suiting you and your new life right now. So I love hearing about that. You've obviously been in the workforce for over 2 decades. What would you say is the main shift you've seen, especially in sort of new joiners coming on board now?
Yeah, so it's interesting. So this year is hopefully an anomaly for all of us. It's it's a tragic year in many ways, especially for those that have lost loved ones. Right? One can never. It's hard to sort of try to take any silver lining out of that whole thing.
Right.
So it's definitely been a wake up call for many, in so many ways. I think as complicated as it's been, and for those, especially, let's just say if you're going to college this year, I mean, college life is not the way it was described to you.
Yeah.
There's so many things, right? So I know one can look at it and almost wallow into the depths of despair. But for me, I think this year has also opened up so much opportunity, right? I mean, things do happen for a reason. We don't always understand why and what. But for me, this year has accelerated adoption of so many things that one would have waited 10 years to do. So, in tech, we talk about it, our CEO talks about it, like, there's been whatever decades of, sort of in what the last 10 years, companies have decided to accelerate things from a tech adoption perspective. Very key. But I think from a personal perspective, I mean, like even about a year ago, I would be convincing, or 2 years ago, I would be convincing business leaders about enabling you to do remote work. I mean, I've done remote work for a very long time, but I've had a big challenge of, not being at headquarters. And again, that's taken me to my personal journey of what am I willing to accept between work and life, right? There's a whole you. But now I think you could be anywhere in the world.
Yeah.
You can reskill, retool yourself in ways that honestly a year ago were unimaginable in almost any industry. I mean, you'd be sitting with your financial planner who's sitting at home on their computer, and you're like, I hope this person isn't taking pictures of my financial details. I mean, they're doing it at home. So not just tech, right? I'm talking about so many careers. So I actually think we live in a time right now. It's going to open doors. Life is not going to be as we know it, but I think it opens up doors in such amazing ways. So if I was younger, starting out in my career, I would literally look at the possibilities, and I'd focus on what kind of a life do I want and build my career around it. I couldn't do that when I started out. You had to basically change yourself and your life according to the career. That's a huge change.
No, absolutely. And very, very well said. So I guess finally, looking over your illustrious career, what food for thought would you offer others wanting to follow in your footsteps?
I would say, I mean, we always get told, do what you love. There's a very practical side of me. Do what you love, but also have a practical way of staying independent. Because I think in the end, when none of us are really the masters of our life, right? I mean, the reality is any one of us, God forbid, could get run over tomorrow. But the reality is, think about the life you want to have. More than any time, you can create it today, right? I think for me, it is about being able to also balance the personal you, kind of the whole you. So that's something which earlier on I didn't do. There was less opportunity. There's more now, right? So I would give people advice on that. And unlike before, you can actually take time off to do things, and it's acceptable. You can have gaps in your resume. You can suddenly be doing whatever it is that you're doing and realizing, I'm not living to my passion. Go explore it. So I think my overall thing would be, I mean, the themes that I think about, right? It's about reinventing yourself. If you're not in the profession that you want it to be, or suddenly your profession is going away, or it has different meaning, as opposed to looking at it like, oh, woe is me, reinvent yourself, go take courses. There's so many fields out there that need people from all walks of life. So I think more than ever, we have that. I mean, that's advice I'd give to people, which is go, like, define what you want and then go after it. Because, it's sort of like traveling 20 years ago and traveling today. You've got Airbnbs, you've got Ubers, you've got cheap flights. Didn't have any of that. Right? So there's no excuse of, I don't have enough money, I don't have time. The reality is we all make time for what's important. And when it comes to the financials, you can travel on a budget too, right? So, I mean, I think so much is possible. So I would tell people to carve out those lives. And if it means you have to change what you're doing in the process, well, great, change.
Yeah. I love that. Don't be afraid of change and reinvent yourself and just explore what's out there. I love that. So thank you so much, Khadija, for sharing your incredible journey with us today. Khadija Mustafa, Senior Director, Head of Global Partner Ecosystem, Autonomous Systems, Technology and Research at Microsoft. And thank you to our viewers for joining us on this empowerment journey. We want you all to embrace that inner goddess of go-getting. We want you to be bold, be you, be Uma.